Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will report about nutrient cycle and retention. So the reporters are Christine Lorne Aborde, Ken Abel Agapito, and Russell Eda Habonero. Biogeochemical cycles are chemical recycling processes involve both the living and non-living components of the ecosystem. All matters get passed around continuously in this cycle. In this image, the flow of energy is shown with yellow and red arrows. So yellow indicates usable energy and red indicates energy lost in the unusable form of heat, while the green arrows show the continual recycling of chemical nutrients. So the energy flows directionally through the ecosystems, entering as sunlight and leaving as heat during the transfers between trophic levels. So, nutrient cycling is the exchange, storage, and transfer of biogenetic nutrients through various components of the ecosystem so that nutrients can be used again and again. In the nutrient cycle, a nutrient pool is the amount of a particular nutrient stored in a portion or compartment of an ecosystem. So all nutrient cycles are dynamic with what we call the nutrient flux. Nutrient flux is the moving nutrients between the pools of an ecosystem, while a nutrient sink is a part of the biosphere where a particular nutrient is absorbed faster than it is released. So in this figure, as the ecosystem are not closed and nutrients may be lost from the ecosystem to a nutrient sink, theoretically, in a closed ecosystem, nutrients would cycle round and round as suggested by the phosphorus cycling shown in the figure 2. However, ecosystems are not closed and nutrients may be lost from the ecosystems to a nutrient sink. For example, the phosphorus in the hypothetical lake in figure 2 could be lost to bottom sediments as an insoluble precipitate. So ecosystems may also gain nutrients from nutrient sources. Lastly, a nutrient source is a portion of the biosphere where a particular nutrient is released faster than it is absorbed. Next. So there are five nutrient cycles and we will discuss them to you one by one. First is the water cycle, second, carbon cycle, third, nitrogen cycle, fourth, phosphorus cycle, and lastly, the sulfur cycle. So to start, water cycle can recycle itself through a process called hydrologic cycle. So in this cycle, the water takes on different forms in different places, solid, liquid, and gas. To explain the figure shown, we will start with evaporation. So the water evaporates from ocean or lakes or streams, where water becomes gas, and that gas is what we call vapor or water vapor. Next, condensation will occur. So the water vapor will condense into little droplets, which results in the formation of clouds. If those droplets get heavy, they will precipitate down. Now, they could not precipitate back into the ocean or they could precipitate into mountains. And if the air is cold enough, it might precipitate as snow. If the surrounding warms up, they would melt and there would be snow melt runoff. Snow melt runoff can famously form rivers. So what is a runoff? A runoff is the process when water is pulled across the surface of the land to the lowest point. Water can be stored for a little while in places like lakes and ponds and wetlands. But most of waters that falls as precipitation gets pulled lower and lower as runoff through creeks, streams, and rivers until it reaches the ocean. So living things also have a role. We lose water through evaporation from our skin and exhale water vapor as well as pee it out. In plants, water sucks up to transport nutrients from the soil into the leaves, or what we call the evapotranspiration. A lot of that water gets transpired out So transpiration, essentially evaporation out of the leaves.
So the next cycle is the carbon cycle. So carbon is present in all organic molecules, and its role in the structure of macromolecules is on primary importance to living organism. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is taken up by photosynthetic organism through respiration and photosynthesis, and used to make organic molecules which travel through the food chain. So most carbon compounds from plants and algae contain energy, and many of these compounds have remained stored as fossilized carbon, which human use as fuels. So the movement of carbon through land, water, and air is complex in many cases. It occurs much more slowly geologically than the movement between living organisms. So as you can see in the figure 7, carbon moves between organism and the atmosphere as the consequence of two reciprocal biological processes, which are the photosynthesis and the respiration. So photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, whereas respiration by primary producer and consumer, including decomposer, returns carbon dioxide to atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere is heavily influenced by the carbon reservoir in the seas. In aquatic ecosystem, carbon dioxide must first dissolve in water before being used by aquatic primary producers. Once dissolved in water, carbon dioxide enter a chemical equilibrium with bicarbonate and carbonate. So the carbonate may precipitate out of the solution as calcium carbonate and may be buried in ocean sediments. So some remains of carbon formed in the interior of the earth for a long period of time, like the soil, fossil fuels, and rocks, and eventually it will return to the atmosphere. So another way for carbon to enter the atmosphere is from land, including the beneath surface of the ocean, is by the eruption of volcanoes and other geothermal systems. So as you can see in the figure 7, carbon sediments from the ocean floor are taken deep within Earth by the process of subduction or the movement of one tectonic plate beneath another. Carbon dioxide is also added to the atmosphere by animals, massive burning of fuels, and the industrial revolution. So decomposition. So carbon is deposited in soil as organic carbon on land as a result of living organism decomposition or weathering of terrestrial rocks and minerals. So this conversion from organic to inorganic form is called the mineralization. So mineralization takes place principally during decomposition, which is the breakdown of organic matter accompanied by the release of carbon dioxide. Decomposition of matter involves chemical and physical processes such as leaching and fragmentation of litters or the waste, and biological processes dominated by the fungi and bacteria. So, for example, coal, oil, and natural gas or the methane are some of common fossil fuels that came from decomposition. So, over the long term, the decomposition of dead matter generates these fossil fuel products. Next cycle is the nitrogen cycle. So getting nitrogen into the living world is difficult. Plants and phytoplankton are not equipped to incorporate nitrogen from the atmosphere, which also exists at tightly bonded triple covalent nitrogen. Even though this molecule comprises approximately 78% of the atmosphere, it forms part of key biomolecules such as the amino acid, nucleic acid, and the porphyrin rings of chlorophyll and hemoglobin. Um, as, as you can see in the figure 9, The nitrogen cycle also includes a major atmospheric pool in the form of the molecular nitrogen. So nitrogen is converted into many forms, consecutively passing from the atmosphere to the soil, to the organism, and back into the atmosphere. However, few organisms can use this atmospheric supply of molecular nitrogen directly. These organisms called nitrogen fixer, which include the cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, freshwater, marine, and soil environments. Certain free-living soil bacteria, bacteria associated with roots of leguminous plants, and actinomycetes bacteria associated with roots and alders, alnus, and several other species of wood plants. So human activity can also release nitrogen into the environment by two primary means. The combustion of fossil fuels, which releases different nitrogen oxide, and by the use of artificial fertilizer, which contain nitrogen and phosphorus compounds in agriculture, which are then washed into lakes, streams, and rivers by the surface runoffs. So the process of nitrogen cycle consists of the following steps. First is the nitrogen fixation. I am sorry. So during the process of nitrogen fixation, the inert form of nitrogen gas is deposited into the soil from the atmosphere and the surface of water, mainly through precipitation. Later, the nitrogen undergoes a set of changes in which two nitrogen atoms get separated and combine with hydrogen to form ammonia. During nitrogen fixation, nitrogen is reduced to ammonia. Nitrogen fixation takes place under anaerobic condition in terrestrial and aquatic environments, where nitrogen fixing species oxidize sugar to obtain the required energy. This process also occurs as physical process associated with high pressure and energy generated by the lightning. Second is the ammonification. So when plant or animal die, the nitrogen present in the organic matter is released back into the soil. The decomposer, namely the bacteria or fungi present in the soil, convert matter back into ammonium. So this process of decomposition produces ammonia, which is further used for other biological processes. Third is the nitrification. So in this process, the ammonia is converted into nitrate by the presence of bacteria in the soil. So nitrates are formed by the oxidation of ammonia with the help of Nitrosomonas bacteria species. Ammonium and nitrate can be used directly by bacteria, fungi, and plants. Fourth is the assimilation. So from primary producers, which are the plants, takes in the hydrogen compounds from the soil with the help of the roots, which are available in the form of ammonia, nitrate ions, ammonium ions, and are used in the formation of the plant and animal protein. This way, it enters the food web, then the primary consumer eat the plants. Nitrogen may exit the organic matter pool of an ecosystem through the denitrification. So denitrification is the process in which the nitrogen compound make their way into the atmosphere by converting nitrate into gaseous nitrogen. So this process of the nitrogen cycle, which is the denitrification, is the final stage and occurs under the anaerobic condition.
Next, we have the phosphorus cycle. So, phosphorus is also an essential nutrient for living processes. It is also often the limiting nutrient necessary for growth in aquatic, particularly freshwater ecosystems. Phosphorus occurs in nature as phosphate ion. In addition to phosphate runoff as a result of human activity, natural surface runoff occurs when it is leached from phosphate-containing rock by weathering, thus sending phosphates into rivers, lakes, and the ocean. As shown in the figure, phosphorus cycle is a slow process and it involves four key steps. First, we have the withering. So phosphorus is found in rocks, and withering, along with rain, breaks down the phosphorus in rocks and it travels to the soil and in water sources. Next is absorption. Plants and animals absorb the phosphorus in the soil after the process of withering. Plants absorb the nutrients and the animals may eat them. One of the ways of gaining the nutrients in the environment. After the absorption, it will undergo decomposition. It is the return to the environment wherein animals excrete waste and decomposers are able to use the phosphorus in the waste material. Also, plants and animals may die. The bacteria converts the organic phosphorus to inorganic phosphorus in a process of mineralization. The last step is the sediments, wherein some of the phosphorus gets buried in sediments which over time it will become sediments and rock. And then the cycle will then go back to withering and so on. The last cycle is the sulfur cycle. So sulfur cycles between the oceans, land, and atmosphere. It is an atmospheric sulfur that is found in the form of sulfur dioxide and which enters the atmosphere in three ways. First, from the decomposition of organic molecules. Second is from the volcanic activity and the geothermal vents. And third, from the burning of fossil fuels by humans. On land, sulfur is deposited in major ways. We have the precipitation. First, the precipitation. It is the atmospheric sulfur that is found in the form of sulfur dioxide. And as rain falls through the atmosphere, sulfur is dissolved in the form of weak sulfurous acid. Next way is the fallout. It is when sulfur can also fall directly from the atmosphere in this process, and it happens when solid minerals are directly deposited on land or in the ocean from the atmosphere. Third, we have the rock withering. As sulfur-containing rocks wither, sulfur is released into the soil. These rocks originate from the ocean sediments that are moved to land by the geologic uplifting of ocean sediments. Next, we have the decomposition. So terrestrial ecosystems can then make up use of these soil sulfates, which enter the food web by being taken up by the plant roots. And when these plants decompose or die, sulfur is released back in the atmosphere as hydrogen sulfide gas. Lastly, the geothermal vents. The sulfur enters the ocean in the runoff from land, from atmospheric fallout, and from underwater geothermal vents. Some ecosystems rely on the chemototrophs, using sulfur as a biological energy source. This sulfur then supports marine ecosystems in the form of sulfates. Sulfates can then be precipitated out of seawater.
That would be all. Thank you.